November 2025. Just after dawn, students at a boarding school in Niger State were beginning another ordinary school day. Some were already awake. Others were still inside their dormitories, preparing for morning routines they had followed for years. Then the sound broke the rhythm. Gunfire. Witnesses would later describe sharp, controlled bursts from small arms, not random firing, but warning shots meant to dominate space and force compliance. Panic spread immediately. Students ran, some tried to hide, others froze. The attackers were not uniformed soldiers. They wore mixed civilian clothing and worn camouflage in earth tones, typical of armed groups operating across northern Nigeria. Scarves and head wraps partially obscured their faces. Their weapons were familiar to this region. Multiple eyewitness accounts described AK-pattern rifles, most likely AK-47 or AKM variants, slung across shoulders or carried at the low ready. These rifles are favored for their durability, simple maintenance, and effectiveness in rural terrain. Several attackers also carried machetes and long daggers, edged weapons commonly used by bandit groups for intimidation at close range, control of captives, and silent enforcement once gunfire had achieved shock. This was not a spontaneous raid. The attackers moved with coordination. They spread through the compound quickly, shouting commands, firing into the air, forcing students and staff into open areas. Within minutes, 315 students and teachers were assembled under armed guard. Witnesses reported motorcycles staged nearby, with additional vehicles positioned for transport. Some accounts mentioned a bus, consistent with previous mass abductions where captives are moved in bulk before dispersal. The withdrawal was fast. By the time security forces were alerted, the attackers had already disappeared into surrounding terrain, a mix of rural roads, open land, and forest corridors long used as escape routes. Families learned of the abduction the way many Nigerian families have learned too, through frantic calls, radio announcements, and fragmented reports spreading across communities. For days, details were limited. Authorities confirmed a mass abduction. Numbers were revised upward. Reassurances were issued. Weeks later, the announcement came. All 315 students and teachers had been released. There was no footage of a rescue operation, no images of captured attackers, no official breakdown of how the release was achieved. Only relief. In Nigeria's official security language, the attackers were described as bandits, armed criminal groups operating primarily across the northwest and north-central regions. Authorities distinguish them from ideologically driven terrorist organizations such as Boko Haram or ISWAP. From a tactical perspective, that distinction is not always clean. Analysts have documented overlapping weapons supply chains, shared hideouts, and similar operating methods. AK-pattern rifles, motorcycles for rapid maneuver, forest camps, and kidnap for ransom logistics appear across both categories. No group publicly claimed responsibility for this operation. That silence is typical. Over the past decade, mass school kidnappings have followed a consistent tactical logic. Schools are soft targets, predictable locations, minimal perimeter security, and large concentrations of captives that force rapid negotiations. For many armed groups, kidnapping has become an economic system. Ransoms, whether acknowledged publicly or not, fund weapons purchases, logistics, recruitment, and further operations. Each successful abduction reinforces the model. This pattern did not begin here. In 2014, militants abducted 276 girls from a school in Chibok, Borno State. The incident exposed a vulnerability that later spread far beyond the original insurgent zones. Since then, similar operations have occurred across Zamfara, Kaduna, Katsina, and Niger states. The tactical outcome is often the same. Captives are released, attackers vanish, no visible accountability follows. This absence shapes behavior. Security analysts note that when armed groups face limited consequences, operations become bolder, larger, and more frequent. The use of motorcycles, decentralized units, and light infantry weapons allows these groups to outpace conventional response forces in rural terrain. Public frustration has grown. Parents delay sending children back to school. Communities form vigilante groups. Education becomes collateral damage in a low-intensity conflict driven by profit and weak deterrence. This context explains why recent international actions have drawn attention. For years, Nigerians have watched armed groups expand southward, adapting tactics and exploiting gaps in surveillance and response. When reports emerged of the United States conducting a precision strike against a terrorist-linked group operating in northern Nigeria, reactions were mixed. Concerns about sovereignty were raised, questions about escalation followed, but there was also a sense of validation. Not because foreign strikes solve domestic insecurity, but because they demonstrate that these networks are being tracked, mapped, and targeted. From a tactical standpoint, strikes alone do not dismantle kidnapping networks. What matters is sustained pressure, persistent intelligence collection, targeted operations against camps and logistics routes, coordination between federal forces, state authorities, and local communities, and critically, visible consequences. Because when armed groups can abduct 315 people, move them across terrain, negotiate releases, and disappear without arrests, the incentive structure remains intact. This abduction was not an isolated event. It fits into a long operational pattern shaped by terrain, weapons access, weak enforcement, and adaptive tactics. Until those variables change, schools in parts of Nigeria will remain vulnerable. And every successful release, however welcome, will still leave unanswered questions about deterrence, capability, and resolve.